So we're gonna turn back to Mi-ketz just for a couple minutes, because I do think it is really worthwhile to talk about these characters and to look at these characters. Mi-ketz gives us a window into the lives of these central characters, mostly after 20 years has passed, if you do the math out, because Joseph goes down to Egypt. Joseph goes down to Egypt when he is 17, and he rises up in Pharaoh's court when he is 30. And that is, of course, at the beginning of the 7 years of plenty. And he runs back into his brothers during the 7 years of famine. So presumably at this point, he is at least 37. 20 years have passed since he disappeared from his father's household. And we get a great window into seeing the effects that disappearance has had on some of the central characters of Jacob's story and Joseph's story. And first, of course, we have Jacob himself, who appears to have allowed the loss of his favorite son and his favorite wife to twist him into kind of what appears to be an irritable and paranoid old man. At the beginning of this morning's Torah reading, he snaps at his sons, saying, "Why do you keep looking at one another?" When the famine sets in, as if there's something that they should be doing or could be doing to protect the family, as if they are still continuously letting him down. After they go down to Egypt and return to Egypt, upon their return and hearing their story, he responds, "It is always me that you bereave. These things always happen to me." And finally, when it's time for them to go back to Egypt, and Judah lets him know that they must bring Benjamin with them if they are to return and hope to get more food and to free their imprisoned brother, Jacob admonishes them, saying, "Why did you serve me so ill as to tell the man you had another brother?" Were it not for kind of the sadness that is pervasive through his loss of Joseph and the urgency of the situation in the famine in their land, Jacob's progression as a character would almost be kind of sitcom-esque, right? A father who is frustrated by his 10 doltish sons at every turn, and he really also doubles down on coddling his new favorite, on protecting Benjamin, on keeping Benjamin close, and really going through that same pattern of mistakes and favoritism and that same behavior that tore his family apart decades earlier. And if Jacob is kind of backsliding as a character, we see Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, more or less maintaining his status quo. As the oldest son, he should be in the role of leadership, but he is a man who tends to talk big, but really without being able to provide results or much rationale behind his actions. Remember, of course, that it is Reuben who suggests throwing Joseph into the pit. And we know both more or less from the text and also from rabbinic interpretations, he doesn't actually have an end game in doing that. He's just trying to buy himself some time. And in this morning's reading, when trying to convince Jacob to let Benjamin accompany them on their own return to Egypt, Reuben tells his father, "You may kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I will return him to you." And of course, our reaction should be just a very surprised, what? Like, what is he suggesting that Jacob would have an interest in putting his own 2 grandchildren's lives on the line in taking Reuben's word? It seems pretty clear that Reuben is a man throughout this narrative who kind of says the first thing that comes into his mind, but without really thinking through the way it'll play out, and without having clear plans as to turn those brash ideas into constructive action. Judah, on the other hand, is a character who actually shows some growth. Judah is the son who is directly responsible for much of the family's anguish over Joseph. His idea to sell Joseph as a slave to Egypt leaves the family not knowing what became of their little brother. And as we mentioned earlier, the word used throughout the narrative is einenu. He is no more. The family does not know what happened to Joseph. Yet when faced with protecting Benjamin, Judah steps up in a big way. He tells Jacob, I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, I shall stand guilty before you forever. In contrast to Reuben, who tries to take responsibility, but does so in a way that makes no sense, Judah has learned what it means to be accountable. He's grown out of his interactions with Tamar that we read about last week. After impregnating her when she was posing as a harlot and having her hold him accountable with his own staff and seal, he now knows something of personal responsibility and really directly of being held accountable for his actions. He is able to use that personal growth to step into a leadership role within his family, and both as a brother and eventually as a tribe, will supplant his oldest brother, Reuben. Which leaves us last, but certainly not least, with Joseph. What are we to make of this man who rose from the depths of Egyptian prison to the right-hand man of Pharaoh? What do we see in his actions as he recognizes his brothers, yet they do not know him? There are plenty of different ways we could interpret his actions. Vindictive, petty, manipulative, possibly divinely inspired, trying to make his dreams that were sent from God come true. We could see him as drunk on his own power. Most of the ways we could possibly perceive Joseph are admittedly not great. Most easily accessible on the level of a reading of the text is that he is manipulating his brothers and purposely leaving them in the dark. It is certainly could be construed as cruel, and at the very least, it's something where we're left to ask, why is he doing this? Why is he pushing off that reconciliation when he has the chance to approach it head on? And to answer that question, I want to raise up one explanation brought forth by Nechama Leibowitz, the great 20th century Torah scholar, mostly living in Israel. She proposes that Joseph is pushing his brothers in this narrative towards tshuva, towards repentance, and ultimately towards a place of forgiveness. She quotes Rambam, the Maimonides, from a source that some of you might recognize from our adult ed sessions when we spoke about tshuva and repentance. And Maimonides says that true repentance can only be achieved when someone faces the exact same scenario in which they have previously sinned, and in the second opportunity does the right thing or does not sin. Joseph, yes, is being manipulative, but in some ways, he has no choice. Given his position of power, of course his brothers would be repentant if he were to reveal himself. It's only after putting his younger brother Benjamin in the same position he was in, and seeing the growth of his brothers, seeing their maturity and accountability and repentance, that he can truly forgive them and allow that honest reconciliation to take place. And I think that says a lot about what it means to actually forgive someone. Sure, at the first moment, Joseph could have just said, "Oh, my brothers, you're back. I recognize you. I forgive you. All is forgotten. I love you." I don't think that truly, without really doing that work of tshuva, without seeing that things are actually different or actually changed in any way, I think that can wind up kind of forcing someone to swallow or to put aside what can turn into pretty lingering resentment, and what can turn into lasting tension and possibly, going backwards in the steps of forgiveness and not forwards. And so, yes, Joseph delays the process, And yes, it's a little bit questionable and certainly seems manipulative on the surface. But I think there is a tremendous amount of value into working towards what is a more full forgiveness and to getting the proof that he needs from them that they have moved on, that they're not going to do to Benjamin what they did to him, in order to really fully repair that relationship and come back together as a family and as a set of 12 brothers.